Welcome to Under the Radar, a show about independent iOS app development. I'm Marco Arment.
And I'm David Smith. Under the Radar is never longer than 30 minutes, so let's get started. So today, I wanted to talk through an experience I've been having recently where so it's probably fair to say, I typically do lots and lots of small little bursts of work on a variety of my different apps. Like I have a lot of different apps, so I tend to just like be like a little bee, just buzzing from flower to flower, like taking care of little things as they come. But every now and then I find myself in a situation where instead I need to kind of sit down and have a kind of a long, extended, development project to really push a product forward. And for me right now, that's around Workouts++, which is my workout management and configuration app for the Apple Watch. And so usually I would say the longest I work on a particular update to an app is maybe a week, sometimes two at the most. And at this point, I'm coming up on 2 months working on this update for Workouts++. So it's a pretty substantial amount of time and energy and investment that has gone into this update. And, while I've had to do bits and pieces from side to side, which I'll actually get into as a topic, it's a long time thing. And I think, looking right now, I'm aiming to have the update out at the beginning of December, which would have meant that it would have been about 3 months of work, which is a substantial investment. And for me, in this case too, I also have this vague sort of outside pressure that I want the app to be out at the beginning of December so that it can be, sort of nice and stable and out and available for the new year, when it is typically a good time and a big time for workout and health and fitness related things. So as I've been going through this process, I've been trying to be aware of kind of some of the things that I've had to keep in mind and some of the things that I've done as a result. And it seemed like an interesting topic to talk about through the show. So probably the best place to start is just to kind of unpack some of the things that I've tried to make sure that I did before I started. And so these are some of the questions that I thought I needed to ask are why am I doing this? Why do I want to do this update? Do I think this is actually a good idea? Is it worth it? Is this going to be worth it either in terms of, making the app dramatically better, expanding my market, making more money, garnering the attention of press or Apple, whatever it is, it's trying to understand why I'm doing it and if it's actually going to be worth doing, trying to understand what I'm actually trying to accomplish, mostly so that I can know when I'm done. Because from experience, I know that often what will happen is I will go into one of these development projects where I'm like, okay, I give myself permission to kind of run wild and to not have it be just a couple of weeks. And then I can just sort of end up aimlessly wandering in the wilderness for weeks and weeks because I don't really know where I'm going. And I'm just enjoying the development process, which can be kind of fun sometimes, but can also be really damaging or problematic to getting other things done if I just have this aimless wander. So trying to think about when will I know I'm done? What are the core features? What is my basic... it's almost like when you're writing a term paper or something, and so if you try and write the introduction and the conclusion, and then you fill in the middle, it's trying to work out, well, what am I going to put in my release notes when I submit this to the App Store? And while that may change, as development goes, it's if I can't concisely describe what it is I'm trying to do, I'm almost certainly going to get into trouble. Then asking questions like, is it possible? And if it's not, how do I know, or if I'm not sure if something's possible? For example, in this update, I've been working on a lot of Apple Watch audio playback stuff. Some of that is kind of possible. Some of it is completely impossible.
You're being very kind.
We've talked about this before. I don't need to go into it in great detail, but finding that line between possible and impossible was very important to find out up front, and to make sure before I committed a lot of energy to the parts of audio playback on the watch that are the supporting stuff you have to do, in terms of the easy part. In some ways is that core playback experience. The hard part is all the other management and file management and configuration and syncing and stuff you have to do. It's making sure I deal with that first. But it's kind of this process of saying, is this possible? Am I sure I can do it? What do I want to do? And then why am I doing it? And if I can answer those questions, then I'm probably in a pretty good place to get started.
Yeah, this is an area, the whole just long-term update or new app management that I'm just very bad at this. I'm very, very bad. Like I gave a talk a while ago at NS Conference about how I planned Overcast from a marketing perspective, like for 1.0, like for the initial app launch. And I made this big document, similar to what you were just saying about how, how you kind of imagine the App Store release notes as like a goal and like what should those say and how do I get there? I did a similar thing where like I basically like laid out the marketing bullet points for Overcast. Why choose this over any other podcast app? I laid those out early on and did a bunch of market research, looking at the other apps to see like that were that were competitive at the time and saying like, all right, well, why would somebody use Overcast over App X? And I went through all the competitors at the time, big and small. Like why should somebody choose Overcast over this app? And that kind of helped me plan my marketing, focus for the app. It kind of helped inform the feature selection, what to focus on, what to not really focus on, certain markets that I chose just to not address. I'll have my app do X, Y, and Z, things like Smart Speed and Voice Boost and the manual, the reorderable playlist stuff and everything, like all that stuff. That was like my main marketing bullet point list. An app is so much more complicated than that in practice. There's so much more you have to do. Those core features of the app were done probably after 3 or 4 months, or at least close enough to done. And then during the beta, I kind of finished them. But the app took me like 1.5 years or 2 years to make, I think. So I forget exactly. It's been a while now. And so the entire rest of the time was spent doing things that were not on my planning list. Just doing all the different administrative screens and the back end on the servers and all the different UI details. And I find that I'm very, very bad at time management and I would say completion estimation, deadline estimation. Once I get into all that nitty-gritty stuff of, like the main feature might be complete or close to complete, because the main feature might be some cool technical thing that I'm doing that, that took maybe a day or two or a month in the worst cases, but then the entire rest of the app around it, that's so much more complicated. Like I had a major problem with this past summer when the iOS 11 changes came in, and even before I knew about the iPhone 10. Even when it was just iOS 11 drag and drop and all the new table view mechanics and everything else, I thought I would have time for a major feature update this fall, as well as a UI update to iOS 11. And not only did I totally fail at that, but then at the very last minute, the iPhone 10 was announced, and we all knew it was rumored, and we kind of knew that something like this was coming, but I don't think any of us really knew how much work it would be for apps to adopt it well. My original plan for my 4.0 update contained so much more than what I actually shipped as 4.0, because the basics of it, of just like keeping up with Apple, that took the entire amount of time I had. And the very, very small number of bullet point features that actually made it out, in addition to those, like the new like contextual row actions where you can pull across the whole row to delete, like mail, I added those on the very last day of the beta. It took me half a day. I added them in the very last build. Everything, the entire rest of the time was spent on on the massive amount of work required to just update the UI for these things, and to pull out some of my old hacks and to put in a couple of new hacks, but try to keep the new hacks at least fewer in number or severity than the old ones. And I just completely mismanaged and, more importantly, totally misestimated the entire project.
Yeah, and I feel like, too, the thing that I know, it sounds similar to what happened to you, but I know it happens to me many times, is not necessarily realizing, too, how once you start embarking down the road of a big update, the awkward position you find yourself in is then like the app, from a user-facing perspective, essentially appears stalled. You all of a sudden you stop getting small, minor, like incremental updates that, like the things that just take a half a day to work on, to build and add to the app. Like all of a sudden they get sort of stuck behind this dam of this big feature that it feels it's either technically difficult to ship because you end up with weird like version control management stuff of like, well, I could add it to the old version, but the old version is like massively going to be, ripped apart and put back together, or it's doing work that is going to be, replaced or have to be repeated in the actual, like the new feature branch or things like that. Like you end up in these really awkward places where suddenly the app just kind of gets stuck, and that's really awkward. And I feel like in some ways it's a good thing to keep in the front of my mind that, right now all of my apps, except for Workouts Plus, have been updated for the iPhone 10. And that's like, that's good. Like that, all those updates are up. But for users of Workouts Plus, as much as it's nice for me to be able to say, oh, coming soon, like awesome, amazing update that I think you're really going to love. It's kind of awkward too that it's, the app that I'm putting the most effort into is the one that is falling the most behind. And so it's probably worth making sure that as we're starting on these projects, it's like, sort of timing them right. Like often I think we've talked about before in the show where it's often good to do these types of updates and maybe in the sort of like February to April time frame, in sort of Apple's development cycle where things tend to be fairly calm before WWDC, which obviously I didn't do this time. But in general, it's just a weird thing to keep in mind that like you have to make sure that is undertaking this project and putting the app into this weird sort of hiatus state, like worth it and a good thing to do. Just otherwise you could actually end up shooting yourself in the foot by making the app feel worse and worse to your customers. And by the time you finish, you arrive back and be like, hey, here's this great new thing. And they've all left. And, that could be rather problematic.
This episode is brought to you by Eero. Never think about Wi-Fi again. Eero has created the dream Wi-Fi setup, a fast, reliable connection throughout your entire house, even out into your backyard if you want to. And now is the best time to get on board with Eero as they've just released their super slick second-generation devices. Eero has now introduced their tri-band second-generation model, along with the Eero Beacon, which allows you to build a Wi-Fi system perfectly tailored to your home. The second-generation Eero includes a third 5 GHz radio, making it twice as fast as before. This lets you do more than ever. Whatever your Wi-Fi needs, Eero has the power to blanket your entire home in fast, reliable Wi-Fi. It sits flat on any surface, just plug it into the wall with the included power adapter, and you are ready to connect your Eero either with Ethernet or wirelessly. And the new Eero also includes a new Thread radio, which lets you connect to low-power devices such as locks, doorbells, and more. And the new Eero Beacon is pretty cool. The Eero Beacon, you just plug it into a wall, and it expands coverage into any room. You can add as many Eero beacons as you want, so long as you have a base Eero device for them to connect to. And this even includes a built-in LED nightlight with an ambient night sensor. The beacon is super cool, super slick, plugs right in, sits flush against the wall. You barely even notice it's there. It's really great. The Eero app also lets you manage your network from the palm of your hand, and you can also easily create and share a guest network too. They make it so easy to do all this stuff. And the Eero customer support is great if you need any help. The new Eero system starts at just $399 for one second-generation Eero and 2 beacons, and that is everything you need for, I would say, almost any place. If you need more, you can add more later, but you probably don't need more than that. Listeners of this show can get free overnight shipping to the U.S. or Canada when you head over to Eero.com, that's EERO.com, and use promo code RADAR. That's Eero.com, promo code RADAR for free overnight shipping. Thank you to Eero for supporting this show.
So once you've gotten through all that and you're actually in the middle of building an update, the hardest things I find in a lot of ways is keeping motivated, keeping progress moving forward every day. Because, in a large point, like in independent development often feels, fairly isolated or lonely, but it definitely feels the most isolated for me when I'm working on features that take weeks and weeks or months and months to work on, because it's just kind of like me off in my own little world, working on stuff. One thing I wanted to mention in the show is, over the years of doing this, I've developed a little, it's a little mental crutch that, for me, helps me to stay motivated and to feel like I'm continuing to move forward. Because often what will happen, you can spend all day, like a definite, focused, hard-working day of effort, and you get to the end and you don't feel like you accomplished anything. And that is just so demotivating, so crushing. Like those days are like then make me start questioning all kinds of things about whether I should even be working on this. Is this good? Should I just completely drop this app and like go do something else? Should I find a new career? I'm terrible at this. Like lots of not productive good things. But
you're lucky if those are just days too. I've had months like that.
Yeah. But one thing that I have found to be helpful for me personally is to try and every day have one thing that I did that day that I can point to, which can be as small as can be small, it can be big, whatever it is. But I try and structure my work such that at the end of the day, I have one thing that I can point to and say like, that's what I did. That little feature, that thing, and it's a concrete, tangible example. And sometimes you can't do this. You know, some projects will just, you know, you're doing some deep model layer work that takes a few days, and like, okay, but once you've done it, like then that becomes your thing for those 3 days. But I found that to be and then at the end of every day, I consciously make the decision to think about what I did and to like remind myself of that thing that I accomplished, even if it is just one thing. And typically it is just one thing. And that I found doing that over and over again, kind of it keeps me honest in terms of keeps me from getting sucked down rabbit holes that are sort of unproductive and I'm not actually getting anywhere in. You know, it's like if I have nothing to show for the end of the day and that happens like 2 or 3 days in a row, like maybe something's wrong. Maybe I'm doing something that I really shouldn't be doing. And it gives me that awareness. And on the flip side, it helps me to just be aware of that and say like, yes, like I did this. And what I found is like, it's somewhat obvious, but it's like if you string together enough days where you accomplish something tangible every day, you make genuine progress. And so, I don't know, that's just like a little silly trick that I've found for tricking myself into making progress, especially in the midst of things that can take a long time.
Yeah, it also, you know, for me, like, you know, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, doing my little swipe actions thing in half a day at the end, it made me feel a lot better about the release. Like, it made me, you know, I was having so much doubt during the development cycle of my 4.0 of like, am I doing enough here that customers will actually care about? Like, if this is taking, you know, we've talked about this before too, I'm spending months on this update, and is this actually including anything that my customers will get excited about, or is it just changing things, or just keeping up with iOS and new phones? Like, that's just a bare minimum of what I should be doing, is just keeping up. You know, ideally, I'm also making things better. And so I started to look for features that were fairly low complexity to implement that people have been asking for, and just try to knock some of those out in like the last few days that I had. And that really helped a lot, not only for making the update better, but for making me feel like I had spent all this time for like a sum total product here of something that was actually worth that time, even though the distribution within that of how I spent that time versus those meaningful features might not have been ideal.
Yeah, and I think the important thing there is it almost makes me wonder if you would have been well served to do those small little features in the middle of your development cycle as best as you could, to try and like have these little rewards or these little like psychological perks. Because I know for myself, like I love having every now and then. Often it ends up happening like it's on a Friday, but I'll just kind of like have a day where I just allow myself, like the thing I'm going to do is try something kind of crazy, and I enjoy that, and it's a motivating thing and an encouraging thing, and it allowing myself kind of a conscious decision to do that allows me to make progress in the kind of the meat and potatoes part of the app, where it's maybe not quite as fun or not quite as interesting. It's like, well, once I've done this, then I can work on that cool thing that I know I'm going to feel good about, even if it is maybe just a teeny little detail or something that most users will never notice. Like I remember when I was working on the achievement system in Pedometer++, where you can earn badges if you work on them. Like I allowed myself a day where I was just going to work on making the badges sparkle when you earn them.
That's so cool.
which was just like a totally silly idea. Like, it's I love that. I love it in the app. Like, I think it works really well. And like, the menu bar button at the top that opens the badge page sparkles too with the same effect when you when you earn a new badge and things. And like, it's great. But it was a reward for a lot of the other hard work of doing like some ridiculously or maybe surprisingly hard logic computation to work out, how you calculate how long your streak is and what the longest streak you have is. And like, there's some really nasty work you have to do to make that happen. But it's like having these little checkpoints along the way. And like, it was so fun on that day for my one thing to be like cool, sparkly pixie dust. Like, that was great. And it's just being okay with the fact that like, maybe it sounds a little silly that like, I'm a grown professional, but like, these are the things I have to do to keep myself motivated, understanding that if I'm unmotivated, if I'm not working effectively, like, I'm not making progress. Like, it's not like, oh, if I need, it's like I should just intrinsically be motivated to always work at maximal efficiency. It's like, no, I have to trick myself and I have to do things that allow me to get around the fact that I'll get stuck and I'll get demotivated, and then my productivity overall will drop precipitously as a result.
Well, you're human. Like, you can't blame yourself or feel bad for being human. And like, nobody likes working tirelessly day after day on a project that feels like it's going nowhere. And a lot of people don't have the choice in the matter. They just have to do that because their job is, not very fulfilling or not being managed well. We as indies have the freedom. We're lucky that we have the freedom that we can actually take a day in the middle of a giant slog of trying to figure out UI table views, new crazy behavior or something like that, or some weird bug, or trying to implement some really tedious new thing. We can take a break in the middle of that and do something for an afternoon or a day that is fulfilling, that we can complete in that time and that can work and that can, the whole reason that many of us, I should say, but certainly for me, one of the reasons why I love programming so much, and one of the reasons why I became first a self-taught and then eventually a more formally taught programmer, is that when normal people, I say loosely, attempt to program or do something else that they don't really enjoy doing, like maybe a certain subject in school growing up, when they succeed, they might not get any kind of satisfaction out of that. The people who stick with programming are the ones who can make it through all the incredibly tedious and frustrating parts of it, which there are many, because they are motivated so much by the satisfaction when you make something, when something works, when you build something. Programmers who really get into it are the ones who, like, that little hit of satisfaction or adrenaline or whatever it is, it motivates us through the rest. So you have to find ways, if you are that kind of person like I am, you have to find ways to keep that motivation going, even when you have to go through a very, very long slog. And I was very bad at that this summer. I found it very, very hard to keep myself motivated and to work hard and to make forward progress instead of just banging my head against the wall.
Yeah, and I think one thing, too, that I've found to be very helpful is trying to involve other people in the process as best as you can, is another thing that I find really helps for these long slogs. And so, often it's having a very small, it's not even really a beta group, but just other people who are using the app, who can then be giving you feedback, giving you suggestions, giving you reactions, and even just giving you that sense of like, you ship something that they enjoy or they like, and they can tell you they like it. Like, that's encouraging and motivating. And this is well before you'd get into kind of a broader beta test or something, but just to try and make it so that it's not just you. Even if it's just you and a couple of friends, or you and your spouse, or whoever it is, but just making it so that it's not just like, if you can make that a little bit bigger, I find this really helpful. And it's also probably helpful in making sure that you're actually making progress, that, you can have some shared perspective on, like, is the app better now with this update than it was before, or not? Because you can easily sort of find yourself sucked down into the rabbit hole where you are doing something because it's what you've been working on for a long time, but you may be kind of losing the forest for the trees at a certain point. So it's definitely helpful to kind of spread that out a little bit, if you have the ability to do that.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why I took the somewhat, I think, unusual step of developing the 4.0 UI kind of in the open. I did a lot of like Twitter development, basically, where I'd like post screenshots on Twitter and say, hey, what do you think of this? Or is this kind of weird? Or which of these 4 options you think would be best or work well or whatever else, taking kind of a lot of like informal Twitter polls, basically. And normally I would do all this development in secret and then just really, release the final product and, try to make a big splash or whatever else then, and try to keep everything secret the whole time, which is very stressful and difficult, especially if you want to do a large beta. And this time I decided to just do it in the open, in part because I was tired of keeping things secret, but also in part because I wanted a little bit more of that validation and of that testing, and it actually made a better product in the end. Like having public feedback on it. And I know this is a luxury that not everyone has the audience size to do, but everyone has something like that. Like whatever your abilities or resources are, use them. Even if it isn't a bunch of people on Twitter, like it can be friends in real life. It can be other testers. It can be people whose opinion you trust, who can take a look at something and can give you feedback on it. Like that's incredibly valuable for not only the quality of the product, which of course is the ultimate goal at the end, but also this motivation factor in the middle when you're just slogging through. It's nice to know that you're working on something that people actually are going to like.
Yeah. And probably the last thing that seems like worth talking about through is it's like how to wrap up kind of a big project like this, in terms of some of the little mistakes I've made in the past that I try and avoid now. As I was thinking about that, like one thing that I do, I've never found that like having an external to-do list management for code level issues or questions, like never really, it just doesn't work that great for me. But one thing I have found to be really helpful is to leave little like breadcrumbs in my code that help me keep track of things that I need to take care of before I wrap up and before I ship. And so in Objective-C, I do these with the pound warning. I don't know what you call it, like
directives.
Declaration, where you can anywhere in Objective-C, if you just say pound warning and then you write some text, that'll show up anytime you build. You'll get a list of those sort of, and they're almost like to-dos or things that I need to make sure or check. In Swift, you don't have quite the same ability, but what I've taken to there, which is kind of a horrible hack, but it works, is I just say let warning equal and then a string that is what needs to be fixed or taken care of. So then Swift complains that variable is unused and should instead be assigned to underscore, which works just as well. But
that's a crazy hack.
It works though. Like it's Swift does not like variables that are unused, so that's how I do it now. But these are great because these are little details that are like things I need to check or, cause what I don't want to do while I'm developing is like have to feel like I need to take care of every little detail as I'm going along because I may end up wasting a lot of energy on stuff that ends up not getting into the final version. So these tend to be little things that like, it's like make sure this works in like sometimes it's localization stuff or, different units. Or it could just be, it's like, make sure this actually works on the iPhone 5S, whatever the slowest device is, or like little reminders and hints. It's like a great way to kind of do it. And then once I do my final build for the App Store, if there's no warnings, then I've taken care of all of those. So that's a useful little trick. One thing I always do is, I do a get diff from the last shipped version to the current version that I'm about to ship, and just look through it. Like sometimes it'll be a little tedious and it'll take a little while, but I've caught weird bugs or issues that way, and it also is just really helpful as I'm preparing my marketing material to actually like remember all of the things that have changed, and so I don't forget like cool little nuggets or features and things that I added, because just in the scope of the size of the update I may have missed it. So it's usually a worthwhile like just spend an hour going through that diff and just kind of getting a sense of all the little changes that you made. And then lastly, it's probably something that I have been bitten by many times by not doing, and so now I try to be very regimented about is making sure that you do a clean or App Store install of the app onto a fresh device, use it for a little while, get it set up, and then test the update process to this big update, because the number of times you kind of forget about things that way, it'll come back to bite you, can be awful. So always make sure that you do that to just catch any weird migration issues or just things that become really confusing. Because if haven't been using the App Store version of my app for months at this point, so it's important for me to be reminded of where my customers are coming from.
And it should feel really old when you see it.
Yeah.
Ideally. All right. Thanks for listening, everybody. I'll talk to you next week.
Bye.